Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're taking a seriously fascinating trip back in time to see exactly how popular science transformed from a dense, text-heavy 1872 academic journal into the absolute digital powerhouse we know today. If you've ever flipped through their pages, browsed their website, or listened to their podcasts, you know they have this totally unique way of making complex topics feel incredibly accessible. But honestly, the story of how they got there, the stumbles they made along the way, and how they completely reinvented themselves for the digital age is just as captivating as the science they cover.
All right, let's kick things off with a pretty wild question. How exactly did a practically blind man build one of the world's most famous, visually stunning science empires? It's a massive historical irony, right? A publication globally recognized today for its vibrant visual splendor, those iconic, painted mid-century covers, and intricate modern infographics, was actually founded by a man who had lost his sight. Edward Youmans was afflicted with ophthalmia when he was just 13, and by the time he was 17, he was practically blind. He rarely had enough vision to read ordinary text.
Well, the human story behind this empire is just incredible. Since Edward couldn't read the scientific literature himself, he relied completely on his sister, Eliza Ann Youmans. She stepped in to act as his reader, his scribe, and his amanuensis. But Eliza wasn't just an assistant. She was a brilliant botanist and a scientific mind in her own right. Together, this sibling duo studied chemistry and physics, and their amazing collaboration ultimately culminated in the launch of the popular Science Monthly back in May of 1872. So here's our roadmap for today's explainer. We're going to cover 5 key eras: the birth of the brand, its visual revolution, the quirky DIY golden age, a look at its darker historical controversies, and finally, its adaptation to the digital era.
All right, Section 1. The birth of popular science and the enduring pursuit of radical clarity.
You have to remember, back in the late 19th century, the gap between laboratory science and your average everyday person was just massive. The goal here wasn't just to report facts, but to actively distill incredibly complex academic research for the curious, everyday reader. Founder Edward Youmans had a really strict foundational mandate. He wrote in 1872 that the work of diffusing science is clearly the next great task of civilization, and he was relentless about this. He demanded what he called radical clarity from early contributors, and we're talking heavy hitters like Charles Darwin and Louis Pasteur. He literally insisted that their dense academic jargon be translated clearly so that anyone who cared about how the world was changing could easily understand it. Moving right along to Section 2, Designing the Future Now, the Visual Revolution. Guys, the visual glow-up this publication went through is absolutely staggering. Just compare the 1872 inaugural issue, which was over 100 pages of plain, scholarly text looking exactly like a dry academic journal, to the World War I era in 1917. Suddenly, boom, you have these bold, colorful paintings featuring military tech and aviation. The magazine started heavily prioritizing newsstand appeal. They used action-packed, realistic art to show people exactly how wartime engineering and new technology actually worked in the real world. And by the time the 1950s rolled around, this visual style had reached a whole new peak. The May 1952 cover featuring the SS United States superliner is the perfect example. It used these deep ocean blues and sleek white hulls to signal boundless mid-century optimism. It wasn't just about what the technology was doing anymore, it was about the hopeful, exciting future that Cold War-era transportation and engineering promised to everyday Americans. Okay, on to Section 3, the quirky DIY golden age, from crossbows to psychedelic lights. Now, beyond just reporting the news, the magazine became culturally famous for empowering the home hobbyist with these charmingly bizarre, resource-heavy do-it-yourself projects. You didn't necessarily need to be a mad scientist to build these eccentric contraptions, but piecing together a 1940 junkyard crossbow out of an auto spring, or building a 1942 neighborhood plane detector from scrap lumber and a phonograph horn, yeah, that definitely took some serious dedication and hours of sawing. They empowered readers to build everything from a 1967 aqua glider you could actually tow behind a ski boat to a portable wall plug for the wilderness.
I think my absolute favorite example of this quirky spirit has to be the 1970 dodecahedral meditator. Design consultant Ken Isaacs provided the step-by-step plans for this massive geometric plywood structure that you could literally sit inside. He noted that sitting in there might give you a sensation akin to that mystical communion with nature, or the sense of peace you feel in an empty cathedral. Honestly, it was science meets DIY meets 1970s counterculture perfectly encapsulated in one project.
Which brings us to Section 4, Confronting a Dark History. the shadow of pseudoscience.
Look, when an archive spans 150 years, you're inevitably going to encounter eras where the platform was utilized in ways that are deeply troubling to a modern eye. Early in the 20th century, the magazine actually lent credence to the eugenics movement, a movement that proposed a path to a so-called perfect civilization through selective breeding. Because the magazine's founder was a champion of the British philosopher Herbert Spencer, who, by the way, coined the term survival of the fittest, the magazine published Spencer's sociological ideas. And unfortunately, this inadvertently allowed the normalization of a movement that applied genetic inheritance to support policies that disproportionately harmed marginalized groups.
So, to constructively confront this history, the modern editorial team launched an incredible series called In Hindsight. This series is dedicated specifically to highlighting brilliant but historically marginalized minds who were actively excluded from the magazine's pages during those earlier eras. They started showcasing scientists like microbiologist Esther Lederberg, who made key contributions to prize-winning work, and physicist Carolyn Beatrice Parker, whose brilliance faced incredible barriers. It's a really structured, thoughtful way of filling in those historical gaps. Finally, Section 5, Adapting to the Digital Era, Surviving the Paradigm Shift. 6. That's a really important number here. In 2016, realizing that the media landscape had completely and fundamentally altered, the magazine made a massive structural pivot. They reduced their traditional 12 annual print issues down to just 6. Basically, their old strategy of printing 12 monthly issues just for science news didn't make sense anymore. Readers were getting their breaking news instantly online. So they smartly shifted to a new strategy: 6 bi-monthly print issues that were designed to be a visually richer, much more deeply considered reading experience, while entirely leaving the rapid daily news to their digital platforms. And you know what? That frequency pivot freed up so many resources, allowing them to rapidly expand their modern media footprint. They doubled down on daily digital dispatches, but more importantly, they started meeting audiences wherever they were. They launched highly engaging digital media like The Weirdest Thing I Learned This Week and Ask Us Anything podcasts, alongside documentary-style explainer content. They took that original 1872 mission of radical clarity and directly translated it into modern digital formats. So looking at this incredible 150-year timeline, from an 1872 text-heavy academic journal to a 1917 visual redesign for the newsstand to jumping onto the web in 1999 and restructuring for the modern media landscape in 2016, the brand has just continuously evolved. But through all these massive transformations, they have literally never lost that core mission of diffusing science for the everyday curious person.
I'm going to leave you with this final thought. As science and technology accelerate faster than ever before, how will the next 150 years reshape the way we translate the future for the everyday reader? In a world where AI, biotechnology, and space exploration are changing by the second, this pursuit of radical clarity is more vital than it has ever been. It really leaves us to wonder exactly what the next century of science communication is going to look like. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and remember, keep staying curious.